All right, 6th graders, since we are having so much fun with solving equations, we're now going to throw at you solving equations using multiplication or division. And this is in section 3.4. All right, before I actually do anything with your key ideas, I just want you to watch. You guys have already learned what to do with addition and subtraction. So addition was when you'd have something like x plus 4 equals negative 1. Subtraction would be like x minus 2 equals 7. What did you do to get rid of your plus 4? You did something called inverse operations. So you subtracted 4 on both sides. What property was that? It was the subtraction property of equality. So if you solve this, that would give you x equals negative 5. Once again, make sure your equal signs are always lined up. Make sure when you solve these, your work goes down. I do not want to see you go across. It will make your life miserable if you do go across, because later on, you'll run out of room and you'll get lost in your own writing. Now, the subtraction, to get rid of subtraction, we added 2 on both sides. X equals 9. And what did you use here? You used the addition property of equality. So, remember what your goal is. Your goal is to always, always, always get the variable by itself. And remember, you're solving these. You're not simplifying. Now, the next two things we're going to add on to that are multiplication and division. Now, before I actually get into the lesson, I want you to understand what we're doing here. Multiplication would be like 3x. That means 3 times x equals 12. A division problem would look something like this. Y divided by 2 equals 10. Okay? So, multiplication. Division, this is what it looks like. Here's your key ideas. Now, multiplication property of equality, here's what it says. In words, multiplying each side of the equation by the same number produces an equivalent equation. So, for example, if you had A equals B, and you multiplied C to A, then you also have to multiply C to B. An example of that would look like this. If X equals 5. If I multiply X by 2, I then also have to multiply 5 by 2. And that would give me 2X equals 10. Now I will tell you that when we use multiplication, you will very rarely ever see me use a dot or a multiplication symbol. I almost always use parentheses. Now division says the same thing, that you can divide something the same on both sides. So if A equals B, you can divide A by C and divide B by C, and it's going to be equivalent. But notice that you cannot divide by 0 because that's undefined. So C cannot be 0. Numero uno. So example number 1, solving equations. Let's start with a division problem. Number 1. Actually, I changed my mind. We're going to do A. I want you to solve this. Now remember, the directions for all of these are solving. So solve. X divided by 3 equals negative 6. Now, in this problem, you are dividing X by 3. So you have to undo that. You have to undo the division. So, ding, ding, ding. Remember, multiplication and division are inverse operations. So, the opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying both sides by 3. So this is called the multiplication property of equality. The multiplication, the property of equality. Repeat after me. The multiplication property of equality. Please remember to note that. So, if I times both sides by 3. Now, remember that over here, 3 times x over 3 really is this. 3 times x over 3. The 3's cancel, you are just left with 1x. The 3's cancel. Negative 6 times 3 is negative 18. My answer is x equals negative 18. Remember, you can take the negative 18, plug it back in. Negative 18 divided by 3 equals negative 6. If it's true, you did it correctly. Let's do B. 18 equals negative 4y. 18 equals negative 4y. I want to know negative 4 times what number gives me 18. So this is multiplication. There is a times between the negative 4 and the y. I have to undo that. I have to undo the multiplication. What's the inverse operation of multiplication? It is division. I always, and you always, should use like a fraction bar. If I divide the right by negative 4, I have to divide the left by negative 4. It is important that you are not dividing by 4, you are dividing by negative 4. So, negative 4 divided by itself is just 1y. 18 divided by negative 4 is negative 4.5. You could have left that as negative 9/2 or a mixed number, negative 4.5. But my answer would be negative 4.5. C. Now in C, let's divide, I'm going to do this. X divided by negative 2 equals 5. You have to undo what? This is division. So how do you undo division? You multiply. So what's the opposite of dividing by negative 2? It's multiplying by negative 2. Important. This is not 2. This is negative 2. Negatives are your friend. Please do not leave them alone underneath. We have to multiply by the same number. So this gives us x equals negative 10. The last example we're going to do here is this problem. And it's one of the ones that students just mess up on one of the most that I see. What number is here? Negative a equals negative 24. What number is right here? It's not 1, negative 1. What is the opposite of multiplying by negative 1? It's dividing. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to add 1. No, this is not subtraction. This is negative 1 times a. I want to undo the multiplication, not the minus. There's no minus here. So I divide both sides by negative 1. That gives me a equals positive 24. Example number 2. We're going to solve an equation using the reciprocal. Now in this problem, we're going to have negative 4/5 x equals negative 8. Now, there are two things going on here. I want you to understand that you are doing two things with negative 4/5. You are multiplying by negative 4, and you are dividing by 5. This is two separate things. So you could undo the division, then undo the multiplication. Or, whenever you have a fraction, because remember, let's go about this the long way. I'm hoping you realize this is multiplication. Negative 4/5 times x. You have to undo multiplication. Undoing multiplication means you are dividing. Do not write this down. You would divide both sides by negative 4/5. Divide both sides by negative 4/5. Negative 4/5 divided by itself is 1. Negative 8 divided by negative 4/5. We would have to do that and times it by the reciprocal. That's a lot of work. So we are going to erase all this. And it won't let me erase all this. So since it won't let me erase all this, I'm just going to cross it all out. Actually, no. Let's go to a new screen. And here it appears again. So I'm going to write it down. Negative 4/5 x equals negative 8. To get rid of a fraction in front of that's being multiplied to a variable, you can multiply each side by its reciprocal. So, what is the reciprocal of negative 4/5? It'd be negative 5/4. So you're going to multiply both sides by negative 5/4. Notice I always use parentheses. These cancel. You get x equals, and now you take negative 8 times negative 4/5. That gives us 40/4. And 40 divided by 4 is 10. You could plug that back in and take negative 4/5 of 10, and you would get negative 8. Let's try another one. negative 14 equals 2/3 x. What would I do? I have to get rid of a times 2/3, so what would I do? You'd multiply by the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 2/3? 3/2. So that would give me x equals negative 14 times 3 divided by 2 gives me what? It should give you negative 21. All right, example number 3. This is our last example. Please write this down. All right, in example number 3, real life application. The record low temperature in Arizona is 1 6/10 times the record low temperature in Rhode Island. What is the record low temperature in Rhode Island? And right here it says the record low temperature in Arizona is negative 40. I'm telling you right now, you must do this. Always when you set up an equation, figure out what you need to find in the way of the variable. What do we not know? We do not know the record temperature in Rhode Island. So you would write T equals, and you could even do this, temp in Rhode Island. You could abbreviate. But every time you see the record low temperature in Rhode Island, you're going to let that be T. So what do we know? We know that the record low in Arizona is, I'm just recopying what's up here. The record low in Arizona is 1.6 times the record low in Rhode Island. So how would you write that? There we go. The record low in Arizona, we'd write down negative 40. Is means equals. 1.6 is 1.6. Times is x. The record low in Rhode Island, we don't know, is t. So my equation would be negative 40 equals 1.6t. Solve it on your own. Pause the video and solve it. If you solved it correctly, you would realize that you have to divide both sides by 1.6. And t would equal negative 40 divided by 1.6, which would give us t equals negative 25. So you need to write this down, that the record low in Rhode Island is negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's my answer. Always label and put it in a sentence.